Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods, yeah. One in particular, I'm just a messenger, let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box. And you cannot compare them at all, so don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Yeah. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Woo. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is a Monday afternoon, and believe it or not, it's already time to start our 2023 team previews. We are getting towards the end of June here. We are probably literally a month away from training camps firing up. Today, the first day that actually felt like summer here, we got into the mid to upper 80s here in Colorado after the last 3 weeks of like torrential rains. Or as Matt, I'm sure as you call that, a late November day.
Yeah, it's a beautiful winter day down here in Texas. I'm gonna say it's 80 degrees. It was 92 when I woke up to go to work at 3:30 this morning. So what I would give for 80-degree weather right now, it would be very pleasant. I'd be very happy.
So it doesn't cool off at all.
It really doesn't. I mean, I guess technically when we got some of the rain that came through last week, it dropped down into like the 80s, which is nice. I mean, when you're dealing with a 90 plus, 95 plus, and 100 plus 80s feels amazing outside. So yeah, that's about the best that it gets around here. Till probably Thanksgiving, unfortunately.
I was just thinking like 92 at 3:30 in the morning. You're not going to drop that much. It reminds me of last year we decided to go to Las Vegas in the middle of July.
Yeah.
And it gets sometimes hot here, but not incredibly hot. But then they were having like record heat in Las Vegas when we were there. It did not drop below 100 degrees at any point in time, even in the middle of the overnight. You'd walk out, it'd be like 4 in the morning and it's still 105. And then in the daytime, my wife likes to get pools, so we tried to go to a pool day. We only made it to like noon. It was already 112, and I'm like, I think I'm getting heat stroke. I gotta
it's really unpleasant. I'd like to say you get used to it, but that's actually just a lie, because I still have not gotten used to it. And I've been working outside, and as we were just talking about before the show, for 10 years. And it's still, when I wake up, I'm like, I hate my life. Why? What did I do to deserve this?
At least you don't have to wake up usually and go out to like 6 months of it being 1 degree when you started.
I don't mind the cold though. I mean, even when Texas freezes over, I'm still out there in shorts, except for the time that was like negative outside. I did have pants on that day. I was like, yeah, no, it's probably smart. Hypothermia and all that good stuff. So,
well, Dennis, is the weather any better in Ohio? Oh, he's ignoring us for now. Well, today we are going to start our previews looking at the AFC West, the top part of the AFC West. But before we dive into that, the only piece of news that happened over the weekend, Matt, I'll let you weigh in first. We got word that Ray Lewis's son, Ray Lewis III, passed away. What were your thoughts about hearing about that tragic news?
I mean, as a parent, I couldn't imagine having to go through something like that. So obviously my prayers and condolences to him and his family. Obviously we'll be keeping all of them in our prayers. I mean, like, there's no easy way to talk about someone losing a child. I mean, I was talking to my wife about this recently. I'm sure you've seen the movie, where in the movie Interstellar, Matthew McConaughey's daughter Murphy says that line at the end of the movie where she's like, no parent should ever have to watch their child die. And now being a parent, like, yeah, I couldn't I mean, if one of my kids gets hurt, I feel like I just want to, like, anything I can do to take their pain away. If they're bullied, I want to figure out what kid I'm beating up. Like, it's just, it's such a different kind of pain and love. And so I can't imagine what he's going through. Again, it's probably, I would argue, one of probably the most horrible things a parent, I don't even think arguably the most horrible thing a parent could ever go through. So it's really sad to hear that he passed. And again, my condolences and love to the Lewis family.
Yeah, I thought the exact same thing. It was just kind of really sad to see that news coming up. Thoughts going out definitely to Ray Lewis and his family. His son can't have been an easy thing to go through. A little bit of a sad piece of news that came out this weekend. I don't know if you have any other thoughts, Dennis.
To lose a child, and I know it's making fun of Ray Lewis is low-hanging fruit, but losing a child is never easy, and my thoughts and prayers go out to him.
Well, as I said, we are going to look at our first set of team previews. We're doing the first half of the AFC West today because whether I want to accept it or not, the Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl. So we usually start with the reigning champion. You're welcome, Kansas City. You get to go first. So the Kansas City Chiefs, last year, they were 14-3. They finished first in the AFC West, went on to win the Super Bowl. Key additions this offseason, they brought in Blaine Gabbert to be the new backup quarterback. They got Jawan Taylor at right tackle, Donovan Smith at left tackle, and Richie James at wide receiver. And you might be saying key additions, but hold your beer until the end, because you're going to love Richie James, actually the best finishing fantasy wide receiver on the roster from 2022. Key losses: Juju Smith-Schuster went to the Patriots, Mecole Hardman went to the Jets, Ronald Jones is a Cowboy, and Frank Clark just signed with the Broncos, the outside linebacker. Key rookies: Felix, I don't know how to pronounce that last name, and I would ask Matt because he's the college guy, but he's not pronouncing, as we know. I think it's Nduki Azoma.
I honestly couldn't even tell you how to produce it either, but really good defensive end from Kansas State, I can tell you that.
So they got him for pass rushing help, and they got Rashee Rice at wide receiver. So their key fantasy assets: Patrick Mahomes actually finished as QB1 last year. I didn't remember that, but when I looked it up, that's where he was. Running backs, they brought back Jerick McKinnon, who was their highest finishing running back, finishing as RB20. Isaiah Pacheco finished as RB37. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is still there. He finished as RB46. Wide receivers: Marquez Valdez-Scantling finished as wide receiver 54. Kadarius Toney, who came over from the Giants last year, finished as wide receiver 109, missed a lot of time throughout the season. Sky Moore, their heavily hyped rookie selection, finished as wide receiver 121 last year. And James, who joins the team, actually finished as wide receiver 50. I think he was with the Giants last year. And then they also have Rice. Travis Kelce, of course, finished as tight end 1 and is probably the only receiver you need to know about with the Chiefs. So, Dennis, I'll start with you first. What are your fantasy expectations for the Kansas City Chiefs?
It's Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and all you others. Now, I feel like Isaiah Pacheco, he finished last year's RB37 in the Dynasty Nerds ADP. Let me get down here. He's going off the board right now at RB27 in startup drafts. I feel like that's probably a little bit rich. He'll have some games, but we saw last season Pacheco is going to lose passing down touches to Jerick McKinnon. But McKinnon wasn't that effective until the very end of the season. As talented as Kadarius Toney can be in the wide receiver room, who knows how healthy he will be. It's a more complicated offense, and we tend to see wide receivers get on the same page as Patrick Mahomes a little bit more in year 2. So both Toney and Sky Moore could be up for a step up in production, but it's Kelce and it's Mahomes. You got tight end 1, you got wide receiver 1, and I don't think it would surprise anybody if they both ended up there again this year. From a dynasty perspective, I think people are still drafting Kelce pretty early. He's still coming off his tight end one in startup mock drafts. He's got probably 3 more highly productive years left, and I think if you're looking for a difference maker, that's a great place to start. Mahomes is what Mahomes is. He's a difference maker. He's QB1 on a Hall of Fame trajectory as it is. So I like those 2 assets. Everything else I'm looking to get is the deepest possible discount. So I'm probably going to end up with Rashee Rice as opposed to Kadarius Toney or even MVS for that matter, or Sky Moore.
It was heartening to see that Rice has not been going in the same place Moore went in rookie drafts last year.
Yeah. Well, Sky Moore got drafted a lot higher too, didn't he? He was, what was he, a 2nd round pick last year?
Yeah, he was a second.
First round pick?
Kind of was creeping up into the late first towards the end of rookie drafts there.
No, I mean I think you mean in the NFL draft. I think he went in the 2nd round.
Yeah, the NFL draft. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty much with Dennis on this. It's all about Mahomes and Kelce. That's fairly evident. I mean, I think Kelce, the dude's missed, 1 game in his 10+ year career. Like he's Iron Man. Even when he's injured, he's out there playing. And we've talked a lot about it. As much as I think Aaron Rodgers, up until Mahomes of recent past, was the best quarterback I've ever seen. Mahomes has taken that mantle and run with it. He's going to probably have it for a very long time. They're going to continue to be studs. I mean, if they showed us anything last year, it's taking away what many thought was their best offensive weapon, and Tyreek Hill does nothing to that offense. Travis Kelce is still unstoppable, being what many thought was the only player to try and stop on that offense. Pacheco is kind of interesting to me. I mean, Dennis mentioned that he finished last year's RB37, and that was with not getting a lot of run early on. He really kind of came on toward the end of the season, and they just don't have a lot in this room. I mean, Jerick McKinnon has his moments. So does Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But if I had to guess, I would think they're going to rely more on Pacheco than those other 2. And again, he mentioned he's going off the board at RB27. I don't disagree that that's a little high, but I might be willing to take a bet at that point because I do think he's got a chance to outproduce that ADP and jump into maybe like a RB 18 to 24 and be an RB2, especially in that kind of offense where if they get down in the red zone, they might be willing to give him the ball to get a couple extra touchdowns because he's definitely in my opinion, the bigger, better running back out of the 3 they have on the roster, and Jerick McKinnon definitely better than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So I think I would be willing to take a bet on him. As for the wide receivers, I don't know the only one I'd be interested in drafting is Sky Moore. 2nd year in the offense. I mean, I know he did not have the rookie season he had last year. I think that is due to maybe the fantasy community building him up a little bit too much. It's really hard. As someone who watches a lot of college football, we talk all the time about these guys going from the G5 to the P5 and how hard of a leap that is to do. Well, Sky Moore went from the G5 to the NFL. I was talking to a quarterback coach this weekend about some stuff with Quinn Ewers, and he said it's so hard to transition from high school to college, and then from G5 to P5, and then even P5 to NFL. And for Sky Moore, he skipped a step. He never played in the P5. He went right from the G5 to the NFL. I think this is probably the year that he really starts to show us something. I imagine, I don't know what his ADP is off the top of my head here. I don't know if either one of you have it available. I imagine he's going, you're muted, Dennis.
Sky Moore's ADP is currently wide receiver 57.
So I'm more than fine paying that price because, I mean, I think that he can be – he's not going to be the one for the offense. That's always going to be Travis Kelce. But if he's going off the board at wide receiver 51, it honestly wouldn't surprise me if he could end up finishing as like a wide receiver 3 just because of how much Kansas City passes the ball. And in that case, you're getting, a massive increase on the draft capital you're getting out of him. So he's really the only one because, in my opinion, he's the best wide receiver in that room. That includes Kadarius Toney, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Richie James. I personally don't think Rashee Rice is that great. I don't think he's better than Sky Moore. And on top of that, Rashee Rice is doing literally the same thing. He's jumping from the G5 to the P5. SMU is not a P5 school. So I do think that it's going to take him a year to adjust, just like it did Sky Moore. So Sky Moore would be the only piece outside of Travis Kelce I'd be willing to bet on in the receiving game.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think Marquez Valdez-Scantling, what we saw last year, is essentially what we're going to see. I've seen some people like, oh, with Juju Smith-Schuster gone and some other, we're going to see this huge output. I just don't think we're ever going to see more than kind of what we saw there. But I'm with you with Mahomes and Kelce. I think Patrick Mahomes, people tended to drop him a little bit lower last year because he doesn't have very much in the way of a receiving group. He ends up finishing as quarterback one. He threw for 5,250 yards and 41 touchdowns. He didn't really take anything of a fall off. And Kelce is by far and away their best receiver. I went and looked it up. 152 targets for him last year. The next closest receiver to him was Juju with 101. He had 110 receptions, which is more than 30 clear of any receiver that was close to him. 13, 38 in yards, 12 touchdowns. I think he's really bankable. What's going to be interesting to me, Dennis mentioned that McKinnon didn't really come on till later. So did Pacheco. Pacheco started 11 games because remember, they started the season with CEH. He started the first 6 games, and then they finally realized that he was never going to be a thing. I think he's just on the roster because he's still under contract, and you need to have depth to protect against injuries. But I thought what really made them kind of dangerous down the stretch and in the playoffs was they figured out how to use that combination of Pacheco as a power runner. He had 170 carries, ran for 830 yards. Almost 5 yards per carry, looked even better than that at times in the playoffs. And then mixing in McKinnon. McKinnon ended up catching 56 balls and 9 passing touchdowns. That's pretty impressive numbers. That's part of the reason why he vaulted into running back 20. I think that's why they brought them back together, because they found, we thought when some people thought, not we, but some people thought when CEH got drafted that they were trying to find that Kareem Hunt kind of player who could run at a good clip and catch the ball, and that they've been trying to replace that. Maybe what they're ultimately have found out is that it's not one person that can do that, but they can get that with a combination of players. Wide receiver, though, to me is what's the most interesting, because Juju had 101 targets, caught 78 passes for a little over 900 yards last year. That production has to go somewhere. I agree with you guys. I'm not incredibly thinking Rice is jumping way up there this year. I'm going to be curious to see what they get out of Richie James, because he looked surprisingly decent at times for the Giants. And I wouldn't say this wide receiver room is that much better than what the Giants had last year. But it's a lot of it's going to come down to if Tony can stay healthy and what he can actually provide. I mean, they went out and got him. He was a first round pick at one point in time. And what we can see in Sky Moore in year 2, they didn't use Moore a lot on offense last year, which I think is why his numbers were down a little bit. In terms of what he produced, he was more of a return man there. But there was a reason that they felt comfortable letting both Juju and Hardman go, and they didn't make any big moves to bring people in there. I think Patrick Mahomes elevates the players around him, so I'm curious to see those guys with a little bit more time and a full offseason working in those roles, what they can do. So that kind of brings us to
I have a point to make about the running backs there. So looking at the ADP, we have McKinnon was going at RB 64 because we're waiting on the ADP to catch up because he hadn't re-signed yet. So he was actually going behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire at RB 57. So I expect right now, probably within the next 2 to 4 weeks, McKinnon's ADP is probably going to move up a lot closer to where Isaiah Pacheco's is at RB 27. So it wouldn't surprise. I'm expecting them both to probably settle in somewhere in the RB 25 to 35 range, as they'll be used like they were last year.
So that kind of brings us to, I'll let you lead it off, Matt. What do you think is the best fantasy value out of the Chiefs players?
Man, I guess I'm going to stick with Sky Moore. I mean, for him to be going that late, they have to. I mean, I guess they don't have to throw it to somebody else. You would think they are going to, not just throw to Travis Kelce. While I do think, again, that my goodness, why did I forget his name? Pacheco is as well a very good value. Like, the difference between him being drafted as like a high-end RB3 and where I think he could get to be RB2 numbers compared to Sky Moore going almost as a wide receiver 5. And I wouldn't be surprised if he could even get into the back end of wide receiver 2 territory. I think it's more reasonable. I think he's a wide receiver 3. But coming off the board at wide receiver 57 is it's just insane value for a guy that I think, again, he's been there in the offense for an entire year. He's now got a chance to get used to the NFL game and everything. I think no pun intended, sky is the limit for him this year in that offense.
It's hard for me to kind of, because pretty much everybody's a bargain basement player outside of Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. And so if you're buying Kelce, if you're drafting Kelce at cost, yes, it's expensive. But, Lamborghinis are expensive for a reason. They also provide great, great value. And so it's hard to go away from Mahomes or even Travis Kelce. Now, I think Kelce probably has better odds to finish as the tight end 1 versus Mahomes, who has some stronger competition as the quarterback 1. I'm going to go with Travis Kelce. Yes, he's going to be expensive. You're going to have to draft him high. He's still going first, second round in startups. If he falls to the end of the second round, he's a bargain there. His ADP, he's coming off his tight end 1. I didn't look at his ADP. I'm sure it's high. Let me get up here. His ADP is 302, which to me feels like a bargain. Tight end 1 at ADP 302, especially in a tight end premium league. He's a difference maker. I get it. We want to go to the Nordstrom rack instead of Nordstrom. But I'm going to go with Travis Kelce as the best value.
Well, I think that's not only good value for a tight end, like 110 receptions for 1338 and 12 touchdowns would be great wide receiver numbers too. So you're kind of slotting them in. You're getting that kind of a value as well. For me, I know you said you think that McKinnon's ADP is going to come up a lot. I don't think it will come up as much as where Pacheco is. I think it'll come up some. I think it'll still end up being in the 40s, and that's why he's the one that I'm going to target, because I think a lot of people are hyped up about Pacheco. I've seen a lot of people thinking that he can even get more passing game work, maybe, but we'll see. McKinnon last year, he only carried 72 times and for 291 yards, but he got 71 targets, caught 56 passes for 512 yards and 9 touchdowns. He was incredibly effective too in the red zone as a receiver, which is where a lot of those receptions and plays went. I think that he's somebody that had good rapport with Mahomes and was working good in that particular role, and especially early in the season when they're still trying to find their way with some of these newer with some of these receivers, seeing if they can carry the load and positions. I think McKinnon can have some pretty good value. I don't think he's going to come up that far in ADP. He's one of the guys that I was looking at if I was to bring myself to draft a chief that I would like because, he finished as RB20, and you're right, a lot of that production was probably the last 6 weeks of the season. If he starts playing that way from the beginning and they've already figured out what works and he can stay healthy, which is also a challenge that we've seen with McKinnon in his career, but we've seen him fill this role before. He's not somebody that I think is going to go incredibly early, but especially for people that tend to punt RBs to later, that's the kind of a later round pick that can really benefit you. So that brings us to the last question for the Chiefs. And Dennis, I'll let you kick it off. How do you think the Chiefs are going to finish in 2023? You're muted. There you go. Wait, you're still muted.
You're still muted. We can't hear you, Dennis.
All right. I gave this great soliloquy about how I did it at my lunch break. No, so I was going through the playoff predictor at lunch and kind of hitting the wins and losses, and at the end of it, it settled out that Kansas City was 13-4. There's part of me that's going, wow, that's really high, predicting 13 wins, and then there's another part of me that's going, yeah, well, the Raiders aren't going to be great this year. Denver's got to bounce back. The Chargers should be okay. The AFC's tough. I'm at 13-4, but it wouldn't surprise me maybe to knock it down to 12-5 if I go back and give it a little more thought. There's a couple games in there I think could go either way, but right now I'm sitting at 13-4 with them winning the AFC West.
Yeah, I would probably go 13-4 or 12-5. To me, they've got 6 losable games on their schedule. The Bengals at the end of the year, when we've seen the Bengals beat them, that's likely going to be a tough game. They also have the Bills toward the end of the year, which could be a battle for AFC supremacy at that point, as well as with the Bengals. The Eagles, which a Monday night game. I mean, I know that the Eagles defense kind of gave up a little bit in the Super Bowl, but I still think the Eagles team was better and is still better. Currently, the Dolphins, which is an international game, but we'll see. I mean, if Tua plays the way he did early on in that season, I think he has a chance to beat them. And then I do have the Chargers and the Broncos on there. They always play them tough. I mean, Denver almost beat them last year with that offense being as bad as it was at times. And the Chargers, even with all their injuries, the same thing. So I think they can probably each get Kansas City at least once. And then do they lose any of those other losable games? So I think they're going to lose 5 games. So I'm going to go 12-5.
Yeah, I had run my predictor before we did our power rankings because I was trying to figure out how I felt about the teams. I think the Chiefs will win 11 or 12 games. You can't really count them out. They will lose a few of those games. I don't think they'll be the number 1 seed in the AFC, and I don't think they'll end up getting back to the Super Bowl, but I think they're going to win the AFC West, and I think they're going to make another playoff run. That's just how they've been built, and as long as they have that core of Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, and Travis Kelce, they're going to be okay. So the second team is in our preview today is the second team from the AFC West, which was the Los Angeles Chargers. They finished as 10-7, second in the AFC West, lost in the wild card round to the Jaguars in what was one of the more memorable games since they forced all those turnovers in the first half only to give it up at the end. They didn't really have a lot of additions or subtractions in free agency. A couple of key additions. They got Eric Kendricks, the linebacker, Nick Williams, the defensive tackle. Key losses, Kyle Van Noy, the linebacker, still unsigned, so could come back, but is no longer there. Chase Daniel, their longtime backup quarterback, is no longer assigned and remains a free agent. And they lost DeAndre Carter, the wide receiver, to the Raiders. Key rookies, they drafted Quentin Johnson, the wide receiver. They got Darius Davis, another wide receiver. And with their last pick, they got Max Duggan, quarterback out of TCU. Key fantasy assets, Justin Herbert was quarterback 11 last year. At running back, Austin Eckler was RB1, I believe, for the second year in a row last year. Josh Kelly was RB63, and Isaiah Spiller, RB127. Thanks for playing. Wide receivers, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams missed a lot of time. Allen finished as wide receiver 42. Mike Williams finished actually the highest among the Chargers receivers at wide receiver 32, but Josh Palmer was the wide receiver that got the most targets, 107, second most on the team, finished as wide receiver 37. They also have Johnson and Jalen Guyton, who finished as wide receiver 176. Tight end, Gerald Everett finished as tight end 13, just outside the top 12 last year. And Dennis's fan favorite, Donald Parham, finished as tight end 65, and he is back for another go-around. So, Matt, I will start with you. What are your fantasy expectations for the Chargers?
I honestly think, and this is a big if, as we've seen over the past couple of years, if these players can stay healthy, I think that the Chargers are going to have one of the better fantasy offenses in the 2023 season. If you go back and look at what Kellen Moore was able to do with Dak, and I mean, I know Matt is a big Dallas Cowboys fan, but I don't think I'm speaking out of term here when I say that Justin Herbert is a much better quarterback than Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott, in his years under Kellen Moore, finished as quarterback in his first year, quarterback 10, in his second year, quarterback 2, in his third year, where he actually got injured and broke his ankle. What was that, like week 4, I think? Yet he was so good, he still finished as QB 30 on the season, missing pretty much the whole season. And then the year after that, he finished as QB 11 and then QB 18. They have had an extremely good offense in Dallas, and I think it's not unfair to say that they've really only had CeeDee Lamb. I mean, Michael Gallup's had moments. They did have Amari Cooper through a lot of that, so they did have Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb mixed in there. Amari was gone in those that final year. They have got incredible weapons on the outside, and Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. You just mentioned how good Austin Eckler is, and I think that he'll use Austin Eckler more the way that they use Tony Pollard, which is going to be interesting. And if, though, one of those guys goes down, if Keenan Allen gets hurt or if Mike Williams gets hurt, Quentin Johnston can play both of those roles. And I think that is going to help them out a lot because they're not having to go to Josh Palmer or Jalen Guyton to fill in. No offense to either one of those guys, but I don't think that they have the upside that Johnston does. So as long as they can keep most of that wide receiver core healthy, I think with the talent Justin Herbert has, I would not be surprised if Herbert challenges for the QB1 spot in fantasy this year.
Yeah, I think I agree. They're going to be a very, very powerful team running the Kellen Moore offense. I disagree a little bit. I think Johnston profiles very much as the direct replacement for Mike Williams. And I think Palmer profiles as the replacement for Keenan Allen. It feels like they have their understudies. Now they're just working through it. I think if Allen went down, I think we'd see Palmer be the one to step in and take the lead role. I don't think Guyton isn't a thing. I love that they have that great depth. Somebody, I wish I could remember who. Somebody said that Quentin Johnston gives them Kenny Golladay vibes, not the good kind. I like what I saw from Quentin Johnston. He looked very, very dynamic, though he doesn't play tough at the catch point. He's got to improve that at the NFL level. Right now, actually, Johnston is the guy going, let's see. Quentin Johnston is going as wide receiver 21 in dynasty startups because they're older. Keenan Allen's going at wide receiver 39 in the 9th round, and Mike Williams is wide receiver 45 at the end of the 10th round. And Josh Palmer's going as wide receiver 75. Now these are super flex dynasty startups. So yes, we're going for the young guys with the early draft capital, i.e. Quentin Johnston over veterans like Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. Austin Eckler is a puzzling one to me. You probably saw me searching fervently through the ADP here. Joshua Kelly isn't in the top 240, and I feel like he's the guy. It's not going to be. Maybe Isaiah Spiller takes a second-year step and moves into that role, but I feel like Joshua Kelly kind of started to establish himself last year as the 35 to Eckler's 65. And to see that he isn't being that valued in startups, I like Joshua Kelly as somebody that could step in, be a flex-worthy player, maybe not every week, but several weeks throughout the season. We liked Spiller. His run up to the combine, his tape looked good. He just didn't run well. And then he got buried on the depth chart. Now they've got a new offensive coordinator. Does that bode well for him? Does he get a fresh start? Or is it going to be a situation where part of what held him back last year was maybe not learning the playbook as easily? And then now he's got another new playbook to learn. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. I like Spiller, but I don't know if he's somebody that's going to just push Josh Kelly out of the way. Austin Eckler, after back-to-back RB1 years, he's going as RB7 being drafted at around the 4.04. So if I can get him in the early 4th round after I've drafted a quarterback, a couple wide receivers, or a quarterback, tight end, quarterback, something like that, and I still get Eckler as my RB1 for a dynasty startup, it's clearly a win now move. If you're drafting Austin Eckler in the top 4 rounds of a dynasty startup, you're going to win now. I think he's still got something left in the tank, but we'll have to see. He's almost 30 years old. He's 28 years old now, or going to be 29. Is the drop-off going to come? He was an undrafted free agent. He's only 200 pounds.
He's 27 right now.
Is he? So he's going to be 28. So, the cliff is there for running backs. We'll see how long Eckler can push it off.
Well, he's only 2 years older than Joshua Kelly, who's already also 25.
2 years in running back years is a lifetime.
Especially when there's that gulf of a talent, I guess. I just don't think – I'm not surprised Joshua Kelly's not in the top 40, because I think if people are going to take any kind of a chance on a running back that's not Austin Eckler on that roster, they're going to roster Isaiah Spiller. I'm not taking him super early either, but I still feel like when that pick was made, when he went in the 4th round in the same range as like Dameon Pierce went for the Texans, I thought it was a pretty good value for the Chargers. I was surprised we didn't see him get on the field much last year. I just looked it up. He only had 18 carries for 41 yards and caught 3 passes. But Joshua Kelly, I mean, he had 69 carries for 287 yards, 4.2 average, caught 14 passes. I don't think he's incredibly impressive either. If Austin Eckler gets injured, I don't know what they're going to do in the backfield. They still don't really have any kind of, replacements behind him. And especially not that can do what he does. He had over 900 yards rushing again last year, 13 touchdowns in that way, but he led the team with 127 targets, caught 107 passes, 5 more passing touchdowns. He produced 18 touchdowns. I mean, he's kind of like peak Kamara right now, and I just don't see them having anything to replace behind that. They'd almost have to go make a move or change their offense. I think I wouldn't, if I was holding Eckler and he was my starter and he got injured, I don't think I'd feel great putting either Kelly or Spiller in there thinking I was going to get that kind of production. I do like, you mentioned you think Josh Palmer is the one that they're targeting. That is certainly seems to be the role that he played last year. He actually had 107 targets and caught 72 passes. He had the most targets and receptions of their wide receivers. He just didn't get in the end zone, or else I think he would have ended up being their highest fantasy scorer. I think he's probably one of the more underrated pieces of the pass offense. Even I didn't realize when I was thinking about it, I'm like, well, he'd be like my distant 4th choice. And then I started looking at their stats from last year. I think he's had some deceptively quiet seasons there. But I'm with you, Matt. I'm excited to see what Justin Herbert is going to do with the Kellen Moore offense. I feel like their offense didn't quite click at times last year, which is why they needed to make that change. For as good as we all feel like the Chargers are being a playoff contending team, I think Brandon Staley comes in incredibly on the hot seat. I think if they hadn't made the playoffs last year, he would have gotten fired. And the way they collapsed in the playoffs almost got him fired. I think he's playing for his job. And if they don't have some kind of significant step up with the roster they've built, they're going to be looking to make some kind of a change. So I think that puts a lot of pressure on the Chargers. It's going to be interesting to see how this offense responds.
Yeah, you know who's playing for Brandon Staley's job? Kellen Moore.
I mean, if the offense looks incredible, I would be honest, the Chargers have a lot of names on defense, but I haven't seen their defense be that impressive either. That defense definitely collapsed in the playoffs last year, and that was sort of Brandon Staley's thing. Dennis, I'll start this one with you. What do you think is the best fantasy value for the Chargers?
So I feel like it's Keenan Allen. I know he doesn't have a long shelf life, and he's getting injured a little bit more and more, but when he's on the field, he's a target hog, and I think he's going to continue to be that under Kellen Moore. We saw it last year with CeeDee Lamb. It was all about him. It'll be all about Keenan Allen because he gets open and he commands targets. He earns targets. Going off the board and pick 905 as wide receiver 39. He finished as wide receiver 42 last season, and he missed 7 games. He was averaging 8.9 targets a game in the 10 games that he played. I don't expect that to change much. Is he going to have a lot of, long passes? No, but he's going to collect first downs. He's going to collect yardage. I don't think he's going to have a sub 10 yards per catch, but 11.7, 11.1, somewhere in there, he's going to get the job done. And being able to draft him in the early 9th round of a startup and know that he's going to at that range, he may be your wide receiver 3, not a great ceiling, but a super high floor. I love Keenan Allen as my value.
Yeah, I like Keenan Allen a lot. I do think he has a chance to have a bounce back season. So I'm going to go with a specific position here that has been fairly productive for Kellen Moore. Finished at their position as number 17 3 years ago, number 3 2 years ago, and number 11 last year. That's the tight end position. And I'm going to take Gerald Everett as the best available player or the best value. You could realistically punt tight end and draft this guy in the 14th round and possibly get a top 5 tight end with the way that they target the tight ends. And on top of that, we just talked about how you're kind of hoping that Keenan Allen and Mike Williams can stay healthy. If neither one of those guys are healthy, we saw Gerald Everett, granted the giving up on the play that ended up being an interception wasn't great, but he was a stud for them early on in the season. It was a guy they were going to early and often. Then you bring over an offensive coordinator that is not afraid to feature the tight end. I think that Gerald Everett could be a very sneaky value because I do think a lot of these other wide receivers are going right around their value. Austin Eckler is going around his value. I don't know that I'm willing to bet on Spiller or Josh Kelly because you might end up getting the wrong one. I mean, I'd agree with Matt that I'd probably go the Spiller route, but knowing our luck, it's going to end up being Josh Kelly who starts getting all the run behind Austin Eckler, and then we just wasted a pick on Isaiah Spiller. So I'm going with the guy who's going to be out there on the field a ton and a position that we've seen Kellen Moore likes to feature in the tight end with Gerald Everett.
No, in our luck, it's going to be Larry freaking Roundtree.
It's going to be Xander
It might be. Or, yeah,
so
Xander.
Everett, in the Dynasty Nerds ADP, Everett's actually going off the board at pick 1703.
Okay, so that's
a huge steal.
Yeah, I just looked up his Fantasy Pros ADP. Says
that's what I was using.
Tight end 20.
It's Fantasy Pros, yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the ones that I had thought about because he quietly had a pretty strong season. Only had 2 targets less than Keenan Allen at 87. Caught 58 for 555 and 4 touchdowns. But since you went with him, I'm going to go back to Palmer. And I just think quietly he had a pretty incredible season. 107 targets, 72 receptions, 769 yards. If he got more than the 3 touchdowns, I think you would have seen him vault himself up into the top 30 of receivers last year and would have been the best. And I like Keenan Allen. I'm with Dennis that he's great and a target hog when he's on the field, but he only managed 10 games last year. I think this is probably his last year. It seemed like they were on the fence about whether they were just going to let him go this offseason. Mike Williams is another one that chronically can't stay healthy. And I think it's going to take a little time for Quentin Johnson to adjust to the NFL game and stuff, but Josh Palmer's been there for a couple of years. He has the trust of his quarterback. You don't get targeted over 100 times unless you're a guy that your quarterback thinks he can get the ball to and make things happen. And he is going by far the lowest on ADP of those guys. And even in Dynasty, if you think he might end up taking a starting spot when they move on from Keenan Allen, you're getting yourself a pretty good future bet there. So he's the one that I'm going to go with. That brings us to our last question for the Chargers, which, Matt, how do you think the Chargers are going to finish? They were 10-7 playoff team last year.
Man, it's so hard to predict because I've been so high on this team for like 3 years in a row, and they always disappoint. And I don't think that they have an easy schedule. I was going through it. I think there's like 7 losses on the schedule, or arguably 7 losses on the schedule, which puts them right back at where they were last year, 10-7, and probably squeaks into the playoffs, because I think this offense could take a step forward. And again, we're projecting and hoping, while we know not every single player will stay healthy, it's the game of football. There's going to be injuries, but in hoping that most of these defensive studs that they have stay healthy for at least the whole season or most of the season, which we have not got a chance to see, I think that they'll get at least 1 or 2 more wins. I don't know that I can go with a 12-5 record, because that would be right what I put the Chiefs at. So I'm going to go with 11-6. I do think they're still the best team in the AFC West and one of the better teams in the AFC. But again, they have a brutal schedule with the teams that they play out of conference. And then you talk about obviously having to go up against Denver twice, the Chiefs twice, but to get the Dolphins, the Cowboys, which I think is going to be a very good team, the Ravens, the Bills, like, they've got a lot of really tough games outside of the games in their conference. So they're going to lose probably 3 or 4 games. So I'm going to go with 12-5.
Yeah, I had them finishing second in the West, sitting at 12-5. Again, I feel like 11-6 might be more realistic as I go back through and kind of give this a little harder look. So if I'm going to drop a game off of the Chiefs, probably drop one off the Chargers. But 12-5, 11-6. You know, the Chargers, they're built kind of almost exactly like the Chiefs are built. You know, they've got a really, really good players on offense. They're carried by, you know, a few guys on offense, and then their defense, they just kind of try to piece it together and hope they can put it together at the right time. You know, last year it was Frank Clark kind of coming on and helping propel them into the Super Bowl, and now Frank Clark is gone. They're bringing in Karlaftis and Felix Anaduke Uzoma to kind of replenish that side of the ball. We'll kind of see what happens with the Chargers. You know, they brought in Khalil Mack last year, who's clearly heading for the sunset of his career. Joey Bosa seems to have some great games and then, you know, get injured and kind of disappear. They're rebuilding the back end of that defense. So we'll see what happens. I like them at 12-5.
Yeah, you know, I think they're going to probably be a 10 or 11 win team. Last year I thought there could be three AFC West teams that would be in double digits. I think that's probably possible again this year. I think the Chargers will probably make the playoffs again, but I don't know that I trust them to make a deep run. And I honestly think this might end up being the end for Brandon Staley. It could just be a situation. I remember back a few years ago when Denver had hired John Fox. They were consistently winning enough games to get in the playoffs, but they couldn't get that last edge to get where most people thought they should be. So they had to make a coaching change to kind of get in. And that's when they made it to a Super Bowl and were able to get the win. I think the Chargers, for some reason, they just do not quite live up to the expectations in critical moments. And unless that radically changes this year, I think we're going to see another kind of wild card team that doesn't go much beyond the first round of the playoffs. Any other thoughts on the Chiefs and the Chargers? You're muted.
No.
I'm sure it was some great thoughts.
Dennis, but no.
I have some Devi questions for you, though. So I've got the 101 in the Devi draft. Harrison's gone. Caleb Williams is gone. I'm trying. Do I go Quinshon Judkins? Braylon Allen is gone. Travion Henderson. You know, do I go Judkins? Should I go one of the wide receivers? You know, it's one quarterback, so Drake May is available, but because it's one quarterback, I don't think that's where I'm going.
What do your quarterbacks look like, though? Who are your quarterbacks on your NFL team?
I franchise tagged him, so I'm only going to have him one more. It's a contract league. One more year at $16 million. And then I got CJ Stroud, who will be eligible to come off my taxi squad. I mean, I got Marvin Harrison on my taxi squad. I got Bijan.
I mean, honestly, I'm going Drake May. I mean, he's a better rushing threat than Caleb Williams is. I mean, look, I love CJ Stroud. I do. But Drake May's ceiling is so much higher. If you're about to lose Patrick Mahomes, I don't know that I want to count on CJ Stroud being my lead quarterback for that game because he brings you no rushing upside. In the game of fantasy, that matters. Drake May is going to bring you a ton of rushing upside. He's got all the arm talent in the world. I mean, I don't mean this as a hot take, but I truly think when we get to NFL draft season, there will be a discussion about who goes off the board as QB1. I do not think it's set in stone that it's Caleb Williams. I think there's a shot that Drake May goes. He's got the size. He's got the arm. He plays in the pocket much better than Caleb Williams does. Like overall, I think he's as equal a prospect as Caleb. So with it being your QB room looking like it's just going to be CJ Stroud, I love Quinshawn. I love some of those other wide receivers. Is Mecca available, or is this? I'm assuming he's gone because it sounds like it's been going for a couple of years.
Mecca? Who's Mecca?
And Mecca Igbuka.
Oh, yeah, he is gone.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, for me, I'd rather take a Drake May because you'll be able to replace, I would think. I mean, you already have Bijan. So, like, the only other person that even put in that discussion is probably Quinshawn, but I think Bijan's the much better running back. I'd rather just have Bijan. So, for me, I'd take Drake May.
That's where I was leaning. I was talking to somebody, and they're like, he's like, I just drafted Drake May in a Debbie depleted draft, 1 QB at 212. So I'm like, well, if he's going, because I've got the 112 also, and so like,
then yeah, I mean, for me, out of the players you listed, Drake May is by far the best player. I'm taking May there, and then if you really want to grab like a running back or wide receiver, I'd grab the next best player at 12. Like I just think Drake May is just so far heads and above everybody else. I would easily take him there.
Okay, that's where my initial reaction was to go. Was like, take May, let it ride for a year.
Well, that is a perfect segue for our Friday show. You're doing a little pre-scouting for whoever ends up being the coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, because they will likely have a quarterback question to answer. But we will finish up the AFC West looking at the Raiders, who somehow finished better than the Broncos. And those two teams, new coach there with Sean Payton, as we wrap up the AFC West on Friday. Until then, Dennis, if the people have some free time while they no longer have to research tight ends because they're just going to take Travis Kelce, what should they do to fill that void in their lives?
They should download and subscribe. Give us a listen, 5-star review. Leave us some comments. Tell us how we're doing. We love to hear that stuff, but definitely subscribe.
Well, that'll do it for us today. We'll be back on Friday with the rest of the AFC West. Have a great week.